or you have doubts about why I would ask you to do this. By making you wait 31 days, I'm giving you an opportunity to get your hands dirty and actually do some practical work. To be clear, you are not Now, if you've never used GitHub before, then there are several ways for you to download the course repository. There are also several ways you should not download the repository. So first, let's start with some options for what you should do. Option number 1, use the git clone command. You can enter this in your console, as you can see here. Option number 2, if you're not comfortable using the console, then simply use the download button. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that the internet is a constantly changing place, so do not freak out if GitHub has a new design by the time you visit this page. I am confident in your ability to figure this out. Consider this your first exercise for the course. By the end of this lecture, you should have the entire course repository downloaded to your local machine using either of the two methods above. Now, please note that if you're new to Git or GitHub and you find yourself a bit intimidated, please do not be. You do not have to know how to use Git for either of the previous two methods. Now, here are some things you should not do that I've seen several students do in the past. Number 1, do not try to download each file one by one. As mentioned previously, this is not the way to use Git. Number 2, on a similar note, do not go to File and Save As. This is not how to download files from GitHub. Doing this will download the web page to view the file, not the file itself. In fact, number 1 and number 2 are very silly, because they actually take a lot more effort than simply using either of the methods I mentioned earlier. Number 3, if you want to fork my repository, please feel free to do so, but try your best to keep it up to date. I make updates all the time, so please make sure to pull these updates. If you don't think you'll be able to do so, then please use the git clone command instead. And on that note, when you do download my repository, make sure it's actually my URL and not someone else's fork. Number 4, this might sound silly, but your fellow students have proven to me that this needs to be said. There is no need to type anything character by character. Simply use the copy button. So one extra note about the GitHub repo. Most courses also contain a file called extrareading.txt. This file contains reference material for the course, like journal articles, books, and so forth. So if you hear me referring to extrareading.txt in the lectures, this is where it can be found. Reading these materials is optional, but they are there in case you want to further your studies. Okay, so I want to mention a couple points pertaining to the code in this course. Firstly, for some of you, especially those who don't necessarily meet the prerequisites, may be asking, what is Git and how do I use it? The short answer is, Git is a way for developers to manage and track changes in their code. You might be used to writing code by yourself, but when you're working on a team of 2 or 10 or even 10,000 people, you need a system to keep things in order. So this is why, for example, Git is superior to uploading files to this website. Learning how to use Git is very simple. There are many tutorials out there that will work just fine. For this course, you only need one command, which is the one I showed you before. So you don't even need to understand Git, you just need to copy the command I gave you. Therefore, I don't suspect this will be an issue, unless you also don't know how to run commands. But if that is the case, then as mentioned, you can simply click the button that says download. At this point, I'll assume you need no further assistance. And just as a side note, although you don't need to know how to use Git for this course, it is a valuable skill that will be necessary if you ever plan to work for any company where your job is to write code. Now, another common question I see from beginners is, should you code along? The short answer is no. Now, you may have taken online courses in the past that encouraged you to code along, but the reality is, this is going to give you a very false impression of how code is actually written. Coding is not a monkey see, monkey do type of thing. If you're learning to play guitar or some yoga moves, yes, that makes sense. But coding involves lots of thinking, not just typing. If you think you're going to write a complex algorithm in 20 minutes without actually paying attention to design or structure, and without debugging and going back to fix things, think again. Real code in the real world is not written linearly from start to end. If you've gotten this false impression from other courses, now is the time to improve your approach. I encourage you to watch the lecture, should you code along, for a more detailed discussion. This brings us to our next point, which is, what are the exercises for this course? Now, in some cases, this will be obvious because I'm going to say, here's an exercise, please do it. But sometimes it's going to be less obvious, and I'm going to trust that you've watched this lecture and understood what I'm saying. Basically, any time that you see code, that is an exercise. There are two types of code you might see. Number one, I've just taught you an algorithm, in which case, the next code lecture will involve an implementation of that algorithm. Number two, I'm walking you through how to use a library or an API, for example, TensorFlow or PyTorch or stats models. So what is your exercise? For case number one, your exercise is to implement that algorithm yourself before you ever see my code. My code is actually the solution to that exercise. So don't take what I call the couch potato approach, where you just sit there watching each lecture one by one without doing any coding. That is not the intent of this course. Now, obviously what you do is up to you, but I hope that you'll do the exercises as intended. Now, for case number two, it's a little bit different. Obviously, you're not going to know what the syntax is for a library or an API before I even show it to you. In this case, you should go ahead and watch the full code lecture without first doing any coding yourself. After you've watched the lecture, you should be able to implement that same code yourself on another dataset that you care about. I assume that you're taking this course because you have some dataset that you want to analyze. If not, there are plenty of resources out there where you can find free datasets, so please choose one that interests you. Note that by this measure, most of my courses have at least 10 to 30 exercises, so try to do as many as possible. Also note that many courses contain examples of both number 1 and number 2 types of exercises. You should be able to recognize it when you see it. Okay, so hopefully the exercises for this course are clear. And if not, please make a question on the Q&A. Now, the next question I want to tackle is a funny one because I honestly didn't think this was a question I would need to answer. But here we are. So, some students really like Jupyter Notebook very much, while other students dislike it. Some students really like PyCharm. So you might ask, why am I not using whatever your favorite tool is? The answer is, this question is totally irrelevant. Now, you might think I'm being dismissive of your concerns, but in fact, the reason people have this question is because they don't yet know how Python works. After this lecture, I hope you'll have a better understanding. So in this course, I'm providing you with Python code. You'll get that Python code either in a Colab notebook or in a Python file, but there's really no difference. Remember that, in this course, this is a video course. You're just seeing code on a screen. What I use is irrelevant because you can't touch it nor interact with it. I may as well be using Microsoft Word and it would make no difference. What you do with that Python code is totally up to you. You can take my Python script and paste that into a Jupyter Notebook or PyCharm or open it up in Visual Studio Code. It's completely your choice. Python code works the same, no matter what environment it's in. The same code will work in a Python file, in Jupyter Notebook, in Colab Notebook, and so forth. And if you're having trouble understanding this, please use the Q&A so I can help you sort it out. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next lecture.